Welcome everyone to our panel. It's on commenting and community engagement and new approaches to some of the key questions there. So we thought we'd be fairly, conversational about this. We're going to go ahead and kind of introduce ourselves and the work that we're doing, and we have a nice diversity of viewpoints and experiences here. I might ask a couple questions of these guys to hopefully get some debate started. But then we're going to open it up fairly early on and just let, we have a small enough crew that I think, we'd love to get questions from other people, hear your experiences in this space as well, and just make it, a discussion. So I'll start. I'm the moderator. I'm Anika Gupta. And my interest in commenting and community engagement really goes back to building user-generated content products, what are called UGC products, for large newsrooms. And I became really interested in how media companies handle the increasing amount of work being done by what they consider their audience, as it's termed, the people formerly known as the audience. And that became an interest, a research interest. And so I spent a couple of years interviewing people who worked as moderators in online forums and on message boards. And I spoke to people from media companies and news companies, as well as people who worked in spaces like the video game industry and on Reddit and a community called Metafilter, to kind of understand how moderation work is important in online communities and how moderators create norms and why they're essential. And so that was my background for this. And then I'll let each of our panelists kind of introduce themselves and their work.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Hi, I'm Aimee Thing. I am a PhD student at MIT working with David Karger in HCI. And my focus in computer science is on tool building, but not tools for journalists or fact checkers, but tools for end users, so everyday people. So because even though you and I may not be journalists, or some of you are journalists, we are still inundated with tons of information every day. We make millions of decisions online every day. So the area that I focused in is helping people better manage large-scale discussion. And so the way our group does this is through designing and building out workflows for prototypes, tools, and then test them out to see what happens with people. And all of our tools are open and available. Some of the things we explore include giving users the ability to summarize discussions that have happened and embed those summaries in the discussion. We've also looked at ways that people can add annotations to discussion, so tagging things, annotating articles with tags. So all these systems that I've talked about are tackling this problem of scale and context. So we have this overload of information. What can we do with it? What can users do about it? We've also looked at novel moderation techniques, so trying to help people deal with harassment in ways that the platform maybe can't help them or their hands are tied. I'm sort of just going through a bunch of systems, but also we've looked at ways to promote empathy, so across sides, trying to get commenters to learn about things like moral framing through things like annotation and summarization. And we're also now starting to think about credibility annotation. So can we get people to annotate clickbait or rewrite clickbait for their friends or for their followers? And then sort of the theme across all my work is tools that make use of people as opposed to algorithms. And I think that's an important focus. I think there are a lot of problems that we have today due to sort of an over-reliance on algorithmic measures that can be gamed. So for instance, using likes to surface the top content that you see in commenting forums, and how that can be manipulated by scammers, by state-sponsored agents sometimes even. And so when you have that, you have these issues like fake news, you have this appearance of consensus, which is fake. And you have things like majority wins over minority opinions being lost. So can we put this power back into the hands of users to control their own experiences and to gain agency?
Wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Follow that, Corey.
Yes. I'm Corey Haines. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Harkin. We work with newsrooms around the world providing consulting on best practices for how to bring the audience into the newsroom prior to publication. So effectively trying to get the audience to have a seat at the editorial table and influence all the way from what are ideas about things, so sort of at the pitch phase, through the determination about what the story should be, and then through the reporting process itself. So being able to have the audience have a lot more impact on the direction that the reporting takes. We're very much a pre-publication rather than a post once it's out there. Traditionally, the audience only really comes into play after you publish an article through commenting forums and things like that. And the journalist tends to be very active prior to publication and then effectively disappears because they're on to the next story. And so there's this huge mismatch between when the audience is active and when the journalist is active. And we're working on best practices and techniques to shift that audience interaction all the way to the very beginning. And we also provide a technology platform to help manage that engagement. So all the way from small little widgets that you can put on your website to run voting rounds or ask questions of your audience. What should we follow up on? What are you interested in? That leads to a massive amount of information and data. And so we build what we call our engagement management system, which is really custom made and fit for purpose to take what gets lost when you just put it into a spreadsheet and surface what the audience actually wants you to report on.
I'm Mike Reifman. I'm a software engineer at the New York Times. I work on our commenting and moderation systems. The Times has historically had a very high quality comment section, which is primarily due to the pre-moderation of comments by a team of moderators. So until recently, every comment that went up on the site was viewed by a moderator that applies our editorial guidelines. There's actually a quiz that you can do. There's a piece that our community editor put together in the last year or so, where you can take a quiz on whether a comment would be approved or not, being given the guidelines kind of up front. And I did terribly on it, so it's a hard job. But they and so as these sort of being able to do pre-moderation sort of help shape sort of the quality of the conversation on the New York Times. But the coverage of articles that could have comments is limited by the throughput of that moderation team. And so until a few months ago, that meant that about 10% of articles had comments on them. There was an editorial meeting every day when they decided what those articles were going to be. And so the main thing that we're focusing on is scale. So about over the last year or so, we embarked on a collaboration with Jigsaw, where we worked with them to build machine learning models. Well, they built the machine learning models, but it was our data. Machine learning models to help us scale that moderation. So we have a new moderation tool that works with the Perspective API that scores comments based on a number of models. We get those scores back, and then the moderation tool allows, per desk, where they can set rules for whether some comments can be auto-approved, and that depends on the desk and depends on the sort of the kinds of comments that those desks get on their articles. And then the tool itself has features that help scale the task of the individual moderators as they go through the queues. And so we're up to about 25% and working on ways to sort of 25% coverage of articles. Every homepage article now has comments, which was not true a few months ago. And so, working on scaling that up.
Fantastic. So 10 to 25% is massive growth, actually, for you guys. And it's off the same size moderation team, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's we have like I said, a variety of different interests and experiences on this panel. But I think the question maybe to start with is sort of that first word in our panel title, which is this question of the comments section. What are our thoughts on it? Is it, what are the ways in which it's horribly broken? What are the ways in which, we're optimistic or pessimistic about it? And I think we have different views on that. So, share your true feelings, everyone.
Yes. I am, I would say, very pro comments, although I do think sometimes they can be broken on different sites. I think that there's this big opportunity with comments. There's so much that we could do to make them better, to think about how to better design them, to get better input from your audience, like Harkin does. And I think that newsrooms could put more investment in that. You know, it's not enough to just slap a text box at the bottom of your article and just, you know, people can just leave drive-by comments and just disappear if they want to. No, like there's a power that comes with adding your voice to a site, and with that power should come responsibility, you know. And I think it's also kind of nearsighted to just offload that onto social media, for instance, because, you know, these big social media platforms, they have different set of values and norms, perhaps. They're a big monolith, you know, there's just one interface, there's this one big community. Whereas newsrooms maybe each have their own community, own set of norms, and also they value slightly different things. So in news, you care about education, you care about truth, you care about diversity of perspectives, where maybe some of these, and you can do some of these things on these sites where maybe you can't do in social media. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there.
Okay, but not in that comment box itself as it historically existed in the past,
Yeah,
which was unmoderated. That you think is a failure.
Yeah, well, there's so much you could do. You could, you know, you could think about designing the text box to be better. You could think about designing how the comments are shown. You could let people do things such as organize, summarize, you know, some of the stuff we're looking at, annotate, direct some comments to some people, not other people. Think about breaking up the audience. You know, there's just this whole world of things you could do, and I think we've just started to play with that a little bit.
Cool. And those are some of the approaches you're testing right now, a lot of these. Okay, so maybe we can get back to hearing kind of how that's working out. But, you know, what are some of the other thoughts, comments?
I'm very anti-comments. I think that basically we should just remove them from every place. The reason being, a lot of what I think about is we talk about comment section as though that's the thing we're trying to get. And so I'm really interested in looking at why, what is the reason we have a comment section? And is there something we could do to get that same impact? And like if it's because we want to provide a place for community. A threaded stream of just one threaded stream is a pretty bad way to build community. I mean, if you're saying we want our forum or our comments to be sort of like a forum, like build a forum and put it on there and have it sort of off-site or somehow linked there. So the thing I tend to think about is really just talking about what is it that we are trying to get to, and how can we solve that in a way that is not what I think fundamentally broken, because you have anonymity breeds jerks. I mean, that's what anonymity does. But then having forced real name policies is not inclusive, and it basically keeps a certain class of people out of the conversation. And I would just like really want to think about that.
Yeah.
It's a bad way to have feedback back to the newsroom, because the journalist is off doing their next story. Moderation is hard because if you're not at the scale of the New York Times, like we work with newsrooms that have 3 people there, and asking them to moderate a site or moderate these things is a big heavy lift for them to do. So I think that there's a value somewhere in there. I think that personally, I think we're trying to fix something that is not the right thing to fix.
Right. So that idea of the comment box, what you're kind of highlighting is maybe there's this tension wherein we want it to do something that it's really not designed to do and not doing very well, which is maybe promote greater engagement or collaboration or community. And the comment box is just not the answer.
Yeah, and I'm curious what it is, why we have a comment section at all. Like, can we talk about, or those things and see how to solve those problems.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think it depends what you're trying to get out of it, and I think there are a lot of, there are different kinds of things that we would consider good engagement from users. Certainly, I'm particularly interested in in having more than just a comment box and having, being able to create a loop that connects to the newsroom and continues that, if not directly a conversation, but an exchange of information. But at least for our product now, it does agree with what Aimee was saying, that it keeps people from going off on social media, and at least gives some structure, and because we do have the moderation tools that we have, we can create a relatively, I would say, a safe and civil space for some conversation. Yes, it's when I started working on this, I was really surprised, particularly in our current political climate, that there are comments every day. There are articles every day with 2,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 comments. And I would have thought that the tipping point for a user to say, I have nothing really to add here, would be like in the hundreds. And yet every day there's more. So it's obviously, it's meeting a need that maybe is not a need that you value. Users are using it, they're doing it there, it's in a civil space. So that's some kind of win. And I do think there are lots of other, there's a richness of engagement that we're missing, and that I think can be done both by providing better tools to users and providing better tools to moderators.
When you, the Times comment section, what do you kind of see as the primary goal there? Is it for, people who have read the story to talk to each other? Is it for them to talk to the newsroom? What's kind of the main purpose, would you say?
It's mostly to talk to each other. I mean, there are, reporters can reply to comments, and that's labeled in a particular way. And that's, I think, a powerful that, completing that cycle, and letting that, particularly like this wasn't in the comment section, but I think it could be. Ron Lieber's coverage of the Equifax breach, there were these updates where he would say, I heard from readers, and people, it's just like, this is great. And it went on for days of just this like constant flow. And I think there's a space on article pages and tools, embedded on articles is a powerful way to foster that engagement.
Cool. So then to kind of go to the second part of what you said, which is this notion of the richness that we're missing. What does that look like to you? And you can mention that maybe, Corey, then you can talk about the way some of your tools are kind of adding to that, and some of your experiments, Aimee. What is that richness? What would you like?
Again, it depends on whose perspective you're looking at. I think for a user, there's no way to search comments right now. There's no way to explore that content. So that's I think that certainly for even users ask us, I just want to see my comments. Show me the things that I've said over time.
Okay.
So that's basic things that I think could provide more value to users. But also, some of the things that Aimee works on where, if you could just ask a question up front, there's an article on education, you tick a box, you say, like, I'm a teacher. And then both it's a thing that users can engage with, and a thing that moderators or journalists can come back and say, here's what we heard from teachers. And, sort of keep that, keep it from just being, a comment box slapped at the top of the page.
Right.
Bottom of the page, sorry.
Bottom side, yeah. It's moved around. Yeah.
It's not at the top.
And are you guys experimenting with kind of potentially building out some of that richness, or it's on the, it's in the?
Yeah, we talk about it. I mean, as I said before, our main focus is scale at this point.
Right.
So the product, the user-facing product has not really changed.
Okay, cool. Other thoughts? The richness that we're missing, and how are we building on it?
I mean, yes, I'm interested in, is there a way to find out of the comments, like how many other people read as they scan through it? Like one of the things you said, people are going to want to have a button that says, show me my comments on there. And while you were saying that, it reminded me of like sort of the joking thing about Q&A sections after conference talks where somebody gets the microphone and just waiting for a question.
Right.
And it's actually just, I feel like I want to pontificate for a while. about something and how much of this section and this interaction is really truly an interaction amongst people, and how much of it is just filling the need for somebody wanting to hear their voice. So, like, I jokingly wrote a blog post of the best comment section, which was a box that you could fill out, and then there was a button that says press here to delete what you wrote. Because there is a need and there is a value to let people have a sense that they're being heard. And like at Harkin, our core sort of company mission statement is that everybody deserves to be heard. And provide a mechanism for that. And I jokingly follow on that says that not everybody deserves to be listened to necessarily, but that should be based on the person who's hearing it as to whether or not this is something you want to listen to. And so I'd be curious to hear if there is on both the research and the stuff that you're seeing out in the wild, of how much is it real, true interaction amongst the people, and if there is thousands of comments, how do you sift through that to have the newsroom actually be able to do it? Because reading thousands of comments is untenable for a journalist.
It's untenable for anyone, I think. Yeah, even a large news organization.
It's untenable for people.
Yeah, for any of us.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems you look at, actually. So what are some of the ways that you think of to add richness of experience? What are some of the things that have worked for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your goals. So I think we're talking about sort of different goals here. Like, one is to be able to talk back to journalists or the newsroom. And another is to talk to each other, and a third could be, for instance, just sort of, leaving your mark on this article. And each of these things suggests different designs. So, for instance, I would say that the New York Times is actually kind of a hard place to talk to each other because you can't actually see who's replying to whom. On the New York Times, it's like one of my biggest pet peeves.
If only we knew someone who works on that.
Just a note. So in our work, we've sort of thought about different goals. So another goal that I think of that we haven't quite mentioned here is education. So journalists are trying to get some important, sometimes kind of dense information to an audience. And that audience is reading it very passively. And I think there's opportunity in comment sections to engage them better, to get them to analyze, to get them to look at other perspectives and grapple with that. And there's opportunity there that you can't just have in just like this text article. So that sort of suggests some other features as well. So some of the things that we've been doing around, for instance, our project on trying to teach people moral framing, we get people to annotate portions of the article with the moral frame and then also annotate their own comments with moral framing. So then when you're having a conversation, you can then see the framing of the person that you're talking to and say, oh, actually, I kind of understand why we're disagreeing right now, or I see your perspective a little differently. So that was a specific goal of that project, but there's so many different things you could look at when you're thinking also about this education aspect.
Sorry, just to clarify, but when you say moral framing, what would that mean? Like, if I were a user participating in your test, what would I be doing?
Yeah, so we were inspired by Jonathan Haidt's 5 sort of core moral values, and we were trying to get people to think about what are the underlying moral values that are being deployed in an argument. So so we did a study where people were reading articles about immigration, and they had to annotate whether the arguments were coming from one of these specific moral values. So, for instance, am I talking about loyalty? Am I talking about freedom when I'm making this particular argument about DACA, for instance? And activating those, getting people to think about those, we saw sort of an increase in empathy over the course of a week of using our tool when talking with people on the opposite sides. So just one example.
That's very promising, actually, if you can measure an increase in empathy among people. Okay, cool. So I think we've raised a bunch of interesting things here, this balance between algorithms and humans. Do you begin collaboration before, let's say, a publication moment? Do you do it after? Ways to intervene. Do people want to kind of chime in and ask questions? Are you grappling with ways of building interactive modules yourselves? Okay, awesome. I think we have a question over there. Right. Oh, okay. You know what? We'll get you second. Maybe do you want to get him first since the mic is here? Okay.
Sure. So I have a sort of a specific question about the kinds of automated moderation tools that the New York Times is rolling out and that the Washington Post is rolling out as well. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the decision between auto approval and auto rejection and what that means for a publisher who is, trying to do right by their community.
Sure. We don't, excuse me, we don't auto-reject, just because we're worried about the same things you're worried about. And so the, auto-approval, again, can be done. There are a bunch of different levers that we can pull. You can prove based on, a score on a particular model, which again can be done on a per desk basis. And so, Crosswords has a very vibrant, very civil community. And so, they have a different threshold than politics. And so the auto approval sort of can help sort of alleviate the load in some of those spaces. Again, like we don't auto reject because we're worried about overcorrecting. And so what you can do also with scoring is a comment can be automatically deferred, which means it goes into a queue that said, okay, it had a particular score on this model, so we just need to make sure, it is a flag that someone will, someone goes and looks at all anything that's not auto-approved, a moderator does go and look at. But deferred is just a way of saying, hey, it crossed some threshold on one of these models, and we're, make sure we take a look at it.
We had another, someone right over there.
Thanks. So yeah, it was a similar question, but I'm going to make it a little more specific. So in terms of automation and making the moderator's life easier, I would be very curious to hear your thoughts on projects like the Coral project, and what you experience with it, how do you find it, what are the kind of pros and cons and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think all of us have actually talked to the Coral project pretty extensively. Do you guys have thoughts on Coral? Kind of what they're doing to make moderators' lives easiher?
So I actually don't know too much about it. I'm relatively new to the Times, and sort of got thrown in on our sort of current projects, and so I can't really speak very much to but the product. But if other folks are more familiar with it, I'd be interested to hear.
The stuff I've looked at, it's beautiful. It's great. There's some. For me, it brings back to that. I think it's really great if you have at a certain scale. I have a newsroom that knows how to spin up and maintain an Amazon EC2 instance.
Got it.
Knows how to manage their DNS. And also has people there that can moderate a comment section and actually have the time and energy to do that. Yeah. The tool set is very nice. We've looked at it a lot, and we talked to them a lot from Harkin. But I think it goes back to that idea of is the fundamental thing that they're doing not addressing the needs of, say, small to mid-sized ones. That I believe that there's a talk of some sort of hosting solution, if not already.
Yeah, that might be in the works.
And that's something, because we ran into that problem too. Before we started, we had built an open source platform, and nobody used it. And so we've kind of had pulled it back in and made it a hosted thing, and that's sort of where Harkin came from. But
yeah, and your tools are very plug and play. I've played with them a little bit, because you grew out of this working with public media and smaller organizations.
Yeah, our real bread and butter. While we do work with larger organizations, larger enterprise level newsrooms, our real bread and butter is the small to mid-size newsroom that doesn't have the capacity to do these sorts of things. So you can just drop a script, drop a line of script on your page kind of thing, and then bring it back in, so they don't have to manage really any of the technical parts of it.
Thoughts on Coral?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't worked with them directly. I think that it's a great initiative that these large organizations are coming together to invest in commenting. I think we should invest in commenting more. And I think even just at a UX level, there's sort of like this baseline level of we have horrible, and then we have something that looks nice. and I think that's actually important for users. Like there's a signaling effect. Like, hey, we value your time spent here, and so you don't have this really buggy interface, and that makes a difference. So I'm looking forward to see what they do next, and I'm really glad that they're also working in the open, which is important, I think.
Yeah. One of the things, kind of to add to that too, one of the things that qualitatively I know that they've done to make moderators' lives visible is have a lot of conversations with media companies and news organizations about what exactly moderators do. So, a lot of moderation work, I discovered this when I was studying, is often done very much behind closed doors or not visibly. The Times talks a bit about their moderation team, but how many people are on it. A moderator doesn't necessarily put their name on the work that they do. Sometimes contract moderators, even at large news organizations, they're invisible completely. You don't even know what they're doing behind the scenes. So I think just talking about what moderation is, how you need to invest in it, is starting to bring some of that work into a more visible space, which is good. Cool. Other thoughts and questions? Ooh, a bunch. Okay, we'll start down here.
So this is a question about automating moderation systems and transparency. So presumably when companies are faced with building a model to for some kind of auto moderation, you're faced with a sort of choice between roughly two classes of models. One sort of more transparent, maybe rules-based, simple database models that's you can kind of ask it why it's making a decision, and the other is more black box, probably deep learning based. And I'm kind of wondering how to it's probably more accurate on a test set or something like that, but isn't really interpretable. So I'm wondering how do companies or how have you guys reasoned with that, and where how should we value sort of accuracy versus transparency?
Yeah, it is the black box version of that, and we're proceeding with caution. I guess is kind of the best way I can say it. Again, we don't auto reject comments based on the model scores, and we're sort of proceeding sort of slowly, keeping an eye, and I think it's moving into coming from a place where a person saw every comment. As soon as you start adding automated moderation, you start to lose something. There's some. I mean, and not that humans are perfect, but you've added another variable into what comes out on the other side of the moderation, and so it's a trade-off. I think we're overall we think it's a positive, and we're sort of being cautious about how we roll forward. We didn't just flip a switch and have comments on every article. We're sort of keeping an eye on looking back, particularly at the looking back at the automated decisions, and it's we can't review all of them, but sort of doing that as an audit of how the system is going.
So we've also been working with Perspective as well, because we've been building out actually an anti-harassment tool. So for people who are dealing with a large amount of harassment to their personal inboxes, allowing them to offload that to some moderators, perhaps friends, to look at that content. And we've been thinking about integrating aspects of Perspective. I think it's not entirely a black box, right? So we know to some extent the data that's going in. They published a paper saying a lot of that training data is coming from, I think, Wikipedia talk pages and also the New York Times comments. And I think that can raise some issues, because you have different communities that are putting in that data with different signals and meanings behind those signals, and then those are being sent out to also different communities who may have even other ideas about what these signals are. So I think you kind of have to be careful about making sure what you're measuring is actually what you want to measure, right? So, so for instance, civility might be something that you really care about, but in some cases, maybe it's not. Like, maybe you would have these comments that are getting rejected because they have a curse word, but can be a legitimate use for adults to use, right? So thinking about what's important for a particular community is pretty important. So being able to audit those signals is important. And to their credit, Google Jigsaw has been really good about making that somewhat open so that you can go to their site and you can type in anything and see how their algorithm does on it. And that's led to some people writing articles about how they've been able to find biases.
That's really interesting. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, the Google Jigsaw project has come a couple times, but if you want to quickly just summarize what it is, Aimee, for people so they know.
Yeah, so Google Jigsaw is a part of Google's, I think, nonprofit arm, I'm not sure. So they...
Maybe not. That may be fake news, but I don't know what it's a part of. But they're looking at, online civility. Yeah.
It's an alphabet company that sort of deals with like societal issues, I guess, as opposed to things specifically for the company or for making money. And one of the things that they built is this API that predicts whether a piece of text is, I think the specific word is toxic. So toxicity. Although if you actually query the API, they bring back several different measures, and that's probably due to the training data that they're getting in. So they also try to measure like spam and some of these other things. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, that was like a pop quiz question. I just realized that we'd mentioned it several times. You guys have worked with them, et cetera, on this new project. Okay, other thoughts, questions? Yeah, go for it.
One of the things that I thought was fascinating is you were talking about education, but I think education comes in from both sides, right? It's training journalists to communicate in a way that is open to commenting, and also training the readers and folks who absorb the journalism to comment back in a way that can progress discussion forward. So I'm wondering what you've done on that and where you see that going.
You've done a lot of work on that, right, Corey?
Not 100% sure I understand the question.
Well, so the way I'm interpreting your question is that, you have two sides of this sort of expanded, rich engagement. One is you want to build better tools and systems for users, but the other is kind of working with journalists to also make them more open to this idea that users and audiences can be part of their journalism. And I think that sort of aspect of it is super interesting. So the way I'm framing your question is I think you guys have done a fair bit of work around like trying to train newsrooms and organizations to be more open to audiences.
Yeah, really that side of it is how do you change the culture inside the newsroom where the journalists are still, like, they're experts in doing journalism, and they're experts in looking and figuring things out and tracking all of that down. How do you change the culture so that they sort of open that up to the public and say what, like it's not that the public is doing all of this stuff for us or the audience is, it's not user-generated content kind of stuff, but how do you bring them in? Because there's a lot of, like, the people who are reading the articles and the people who are reading your stuff are probably experts in other areas or experts in that topic, and how can you bring them in together? There's an organization called PIN, if anybody's heard of that is really about gathering up sources. So when you have, you are doing an article on a certain topic, you can send out to these sources, send them questions. They can, I'm looking for experts on this sort of thing. But it's hard going because a lot of the culture that we're running into right now is still that old guard culture of not having a way to really get information in from your audience. And so it's like back before you had real-time tools, back before you had a way for the audience to interact with each other or label things. And so we don't, like, it's not really an answer to the question as much as sort of the work we're really trying to do. And that's what we do when I talk about what Harkin's sort of value prop is. We're not a tech company. We're not about building widgets. We're not about building the technology. We're about changing the way that the newsroom thinks about their relationship with the public and with the audience. And then the tools are there entirely to support that. And the ideas that we have, we build tools to make it easier to do that. And I think it's very similar to the stuff you're doing, which I keep wanting to read stuff. I'm fascinated by what you're doing because it's so much more human-centered. It feels like it's human-centered more than like computers are going to solve the world, which is
Yeah.
Not to. I'm trying not to gaze over at you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this issue when you're looking at your audience and you're trying to sort of guess what they want through these passive signals, such as how much time they're spending on the page or how much they're clicking or sharing or liking. Because, first off, that can be manipulated, as we know. And second off, sometimes what I want, generally speaking, is different from what I do in the moment, right? So, if I go to the store, I know to not buy ice cream because if it's in front of me, I'm going to eat it. But, maybe if a newsroom were able to ask me, like, what do you want to read? I would be able to say things like, I would like to read from more diverse perspectives. I would like to read more investigative journalism or better, deeper reporting. But you might not be able to get that from my actions, where these things are being pushed at me that are maybe clickbaity or low quality. And I think we can fault people for doing that, but you have to understand that people are being inundated with information. They don't have the tools to manage, all the fake news and clickbait that's coming at them. And on the other side are these groups that have a lot of money, a lot of time and power to manipulate that. So we need to give people to have the tools to be able to say, this is what I want, actually. Like, don't listen to this other stuff that's more passive.
And one of the techniques that we really push is when you are doing like a long-term series. So like Michigan Radio was doing a series on mental health issues in Michigan. KQED was wanted to do a series on the homeless population in San Francisco. And one of the techniques that we talk to them and help them do is before you are starting on your series, go out and ask everybody. Like, what are you interested about the homeless population? Or what are you interested about mental health issues? And collect up. And it's not in a comment, it's not can the public have a conversation about it? It's just, you know what? Ask your questions. Ask your questions. They come in, we can then gather them, and then that helps direct what your reporting is focusing on, instead of it just being, a handful of people sitting in an editorial room thinking, well, I clearly know what the public wants.
Yeah, and I think there's room on top of that to include some of the tools and techniques, things like empathy, things like perspective, where as you were talking, I was like, maybe we should just run a survey. Just like ask people what they want.
Why don't we just do that?
but I think there are we're talking about comments as this thing that just lives on the side of a news piece, and I think there's a middle ground between running a customer satisfaction survey and doing just give me your thoughts now that I've written this. That there are, maybe organic ways to solicit that feedback in a way that, a user just read an article about immigration, and we're thinking about doing a piece, and you can have a promo on the page that sort of solicits that and solicits things like, what's your framing on this, or do you have particular experience, or and do it in a structured way so that it's not just like, here's 1,000 words, like go figure out what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I have just a question for both of you. If you've looked at, because when we talk about moderation, I think I at least tend to assume that it's show or not show. Have you experimented with having this style of moderation. So there's a whole team whose job is to curate the conversation and come in and actually be part of it.
Right.
And what impact that could have on this sort of on the comment section, I guess.
Curating the right. I mean, I think in more of a message board kind of form, or a form.
Well, just being active in the conversation, so sort of being
Members of it.
members of it, helping guide it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a mode that our moderators take. It is more of the approve, reject. Although there is a role for folks on the moderation team to we have like editor picks comments that are highlighted, and other ways that content sort of appears in other parts of the site, and there are editorial guidelines for that, and trying to have a diversity of opinions and diversity of commenters. But it's we don't exactly have the space for to the extent that reporters can reply to comments. It's not a conversation. The whole thing. Comments on an article is not a conversation. As much as that thing could be valuable, but that's not what it is for us right now.
Not in that way, anyway.
Right.
If that's on that, Amy?
I mean, I would say that there's not. I don't really think there's this distinction between like forums are one thing and comments are another thing. Like, I mean, I don't see why we can't have these forum-like or threaded conversation basically also happening beside the page. I think that's possible, and I think there's actually problems when you sort of offload that onto another space, which is it's really hard to talk about the thing that you're trying to talk about when it's all the way over here.
Yeah.
And so actually we've been trying to go in the other direction, getting comments even more embedded into the page by letting people annotate articles, such as similar to like what Hypothesis or News Genius does. And then you had a question about curating the conversation. Yeah, we haven't really looked at that, but we have looked at thinking about, instead of just posting a comment and it just going out there for everyone, things like slow spreading. So like instead of everyone seeing your comment, you send it out and a few people see it, and if they respond to it, or if moderators like it, or if they like it, getting it to spread further. We thought about when there's a large number of people splitting into smaller sections that aren't that are more porous than just like this is a group, but being able to say like this is sort of like your cohort, and it's a smaller conversation that you're having, and maybe if a really good point comes up, it can pop out of your smaller bubble and spread to a larger group. Thinking about that sort of things, but we haven't done experiments yet, but we are building those tools.
Awesome. Cool. Other right here.
So, are you studying the profile of people who comment the news? Can you identify profile categories? And who are these people who comment?
Who are the commenters?
There's the community desk also put out a piece that profiled 10 of our kind of top commenters, it's not. I don't know how it is representative of how the sort of population of commenters overall. Well, so the profiles of the 10 are very interesting because it covers a wide range of it's a pretty diverse crowd. I mean I think it gets at things that different people want, and I think a thing that we haven't said yet. Then we're talking about engagement. I think there's a lot of value in engagement. We've only been talking about commenters, and I think there are really positive engagements just from readers, and that's why in things like making comments sort of more explorable or digestible for readers is a really important component of sort of providing this space, both for the people who do have something to say and the people who want to read what they have to say.
Who, I mean, to take it more broadly, how many people here have ever left a comment on like a news story online? Like, just raise hands. Like, how many? So here are some of the commenters. You know, some folks here are maybe commenters, occasional commenters.
Sometimes it's not that we see, you know.
Mhm.
I see a lot of comments. I'm from Brazil,
Mhm.
and I work in the newsroom, so I'm a journalist. Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, and this is sort of an ongoing discussion over how representative they are. I will say that I believe the Engaging News Project had done a survey not too long ago that looked at kind of motivations behind commenting and desires for, so they might be a good place to look and kind of, if for other people who are interested in that, I think they did one of like the largest surveys ever around this and uncovered ideas and expectations, which were very interesting. Okay, other questions? Are we back there?
Yeah. I think we have time for, yeah. So, so the two kind of broad classes of functions for commenting have been for readers and, you know, community building, engagement, deeper education about the meaning of the article. And the other one is sort of, and this has been alluded to a couple times, feeding the information back to the author of the article or their editors. And I just don't know what kinds of tools have been built there. I can imagine a lot of things that journalists would want, from surfacing a community that's impacted by this situation that you didn't understand was out there, or understanding a related story that you should go and chase, or in other words, just leaving aside venting and all that stuff. I mean, what are the tools that are out there right now for journalists to sort of, or editors, to pick through the comments to find these nuggets that will actually help them do more journalism?
Great question.
We actually are working on a tool that is not intended to be that post-publication, but while the reporting is happening, to be able to basically open up and be transparent about it, about the path you're taking investigating the story, as well as being able to send out little calls to action. Like a good example is there's a members only like resort club, something in the woods in Michigan. And a reporter went up there and took pictures of like the signs that were like, nobody's allowed. Mm-hmm. And being able to send out to the audience and saying like, does anybody know a member that I could get in? And so like we're trying to bring that a little bit closer. So it's not what we tend to end up now is the publication happens, and then there's a bunch of people commenting saying, you should have talked to, or you should have done this. We have seen putting small little prompts about what should we follow up with that are sort of separate from the general public comments, but that feeds directly into the newsroom to say, because there are so many people out there that are going to read this and go, I have information. We have, put a little checkbox that says, do you want to remain anonymous? And, you start getting more whistleblower kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of things that can be done still on making that available.
Yeah, I think sometimes it happens organically, when a comment sort of blows up or a particular article blows up. But yeah, I think we need more systematic ways of helping reporters and editors get into that content.
Aimee, we need the tools you're building to summarize comments and make them more digestible, I think is the takeaway from that.
Yeah, I think you have to realize that the people that are commenting are a valuable resource and you can get more out of them, Right. They obviously want to leave their opinion on your article. We know that people are very motivated by that. Even if they see it, someone else wrote the same thing. They want to write their thing and they want it to show up. And so you can use that. You can say things like, hey, if you want to do that, you have to, group these other comments together or something, or, make it easier for people for the next person who comes along to build on that. And then together, with all these people commenting, you have something that is digestible, readable, skimmable, for instance.
Yeah. And then we promised one more, yeah. Uh-huh.
Thanks for this very interesting panel. My question relates to sort of the library and archiving perspective on this. So as vapid as many comments can be, and as frustrating as it is to sort of monitor them, and a lot of researchers find them to be incredibly valuable for reactions to a story, a conversation around a story, sentiment analysis. There's a lot of stuff there. Have you thought about, do you have thoughts on archiving comments, and what's your approach to this? The implosion of Gawker was kind of it's a cautionary tale about how a lot of content can be lost, and all of those comments are kind of lost. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts on this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we save everything. I mean, it was used as training data for models that are that we use in our moderation tool, that are models that were trained on our data, which have been curated and annotated over a decade. Yeah, and I think it's particularly useful also for validating as validating changes as we go forward, looking back. But yeah, I mean, we save everything.
Even through changes in content management systems?
Very detailed question, but there are a lot of places that don't do that as much. You do lose comments a lot. I mean, you lose content online, but yeah, it's a challenge.
I think we're about out of time, but thank you very much for this very engaging panel.